So I just want to thank you all for coming today. It's a Monday night, and everyone's here to learn about sustainability and net zero, and there aren't many communities where you can see that happen. So this is great to see everybody here. This is Sustainable Claremont's 96th Dialogue, so we're almost at that 100 mark, so stay tuned for that exciting 100th Dialogue coming up at the end of the year, or maybe before that. I just wanted to let everybody know that there's a sign-up sheet if you want to sign up to our newsletter, if you want to become a member of Sustainable Claremont, we'd really appreciate it. That helps, fund and support things like tonight. We have another dialogue scheduled for September with Terry Grill on waste and recycling. So you could put that in your calendars for September 16th. And we may have one or two dialogues before that, so check your newsletter and be looking at our website for updates. I'm going to introduce Dick Haskell, who's our board chair, and he's going to introduce you to our trio from Harvey Mudd to talk about net zero.
Thank you, Stuart. That's Stuart Wood, our new executive director, although I think he's feeling as though he's been here about 10 years by now. I just want to say a few words to sort of put tonight's presentation in context. I think, yes, it's on, okay. I think we're all in agreement that the Village South development presents an incredible and unusual opportunity to create a sustainable community. And I thought, for example, I think I would argue that it's a 1 in 50 years to 1 in 100 years opportunity. And we want to be able to look back in 10, 15, 25 years and think that we made the right decisions and the right compromises. There are always going to be compromises. And in fact, as I thought through that, I realized that we have an opportunity right now, sort of a 15-year perspective on the West Village expansion. And I don't know how many of you were here in 2004, but it was an interesting time. I remember there was a lot of hubbub about it. But I think looking back 15 years later, we really did a remarkable job. In fact, this is sort of driven home by a recent presentation from Article Partners and Village Partners, where they have a new vision for the Vortex area and so forth, the sort of northern sector of the Village South. And they were modeling it after that public space that's enclosed by the Lemley Theater and the sort of restaurants on North and South and the businesses on the Indian Hill Boulevard side. It's about 100 feet by 100 feet, roughly speaking. And it has been, no matter when you go by it, there are people there. I mean, there are families and there are events and there are all sorts of things going on. I think it's been a remarkably successful use of public space. No toddler has drowned in the water feature, which, everybody was nervous about that at the beginning. But also the packing house has, I think, it's still evolving, but it's still, I think it's very successful. And the residential units, sort of townhomes and condos and so forth, I think with the maturing landscape, I think the neighborhoods are incredibly attractive, and they're becoming very popular, I know, among faculty. So there's a pool and a park. If you haven't ever been there, it's really interesting. So I think we can look back and take some encouragement from that success, and I think we should be patting some people on the back for having the vision 15 years ago for making that a success. There is, of course, one little piece of that project that didn't go quite as planned. Everybody knows what that is, but that's also a lesson. I mean, we don't have complete control over these projects, so we need to think about that and think about how we can minimize the possibility of losing control of a piece of a project. So with all of the hubbub, I think everybody's been interested in really doing a deep dive on various aspects of what it takes to make a sustainable community. And we have a number of us from Sustainable Claremont and just a whole bunch of people from the community, interested people, have come forward and participated. And some of you will remember that in the spring semester, starting in January roughly and going through April, we had 3 Pomona College students who were environmental analysis majors who started us on a deep dive on the feasibility of net zero energy. And I'll let the team explain to you why we're focused on net zero energy. It's just one of many factors, but I think it's a telling one. And that team gave a presentation, I think that some of you saw in April, and they then, at the end of the semester, passed the baton on to a Mudd trio. So that was all-male Pomona trio, and we have an all-male Mudd trio. I really like this. And the Mudd trio now is full-time, whereas the Pomona students were really just, they had 1 course out of 3 or 4. It was their capstone experience. But now the Mudd trio has really been going strong for the past 6 weeks? 8 weeks? Depends upon who you talk to. They started at different times. So I think they have really gotten to the point where they have something significant to say, and I will let them begin to tell you about it. I should mention that the presentation is about roughly 40 minutes, depending upon how many questions you have, and they will bring you up to speed on what questions you may ask and which ones to postpone. But after that, we'll have question and answer, and then discussion as we usually do. So here we go. Team?
Okay, hi everyone. My name is Catherine. This is Mina and Ingrid. We all go to Harvey Mudd, and this is our presentation on Can the Village South Development Reach Net Zero Energy? So before we start off, I just want to say if you have any clarifying questions at any point in time, please just raise your hand and we'll try to answer them during the presentation. But if you have more substantive questions, please hold them until the end and we'll answer them then. So as hopefully we all know, there are plenty of different factors that go into creating a sustainable community. These factors include things like affordable and inclusionary housing, pedestrian and bike-friendly streets, water conservation, gray water systems, and also net zero energy. And since historically net zero energy has been the most difficult of these factors to achieve, we decided to focus our research on this aspect of building a sustainable community. So since we are trying to fit 8 weeks of our research into 40 minutes of a presentation, we thought it would be best to start off with a brief overview of what we're going to cover this evening. So we will start off with some important vocabulary and some key words that we will be using throughout the presentation. Then we will move on to some case studies and looking at other buildings that have already implemented net zero energy technology. Then we'll move on to looking at California policy trends going back to 2005 and looking forward to 2050 with a specific focus on the current California building codes. Next, we will look at full electrification of buildings, focusing specifically on induction cooking. This will be followed by some cost analysis and modeling that we've done, and then we will wrap it all up with some general benefits of being net zero energy. So to start off with the important vocabulary, our first term is net zero energy, or NZE, which can also be referred to as zero net energy, which is ZNE, or just zero energy, which is ZE. And there are 2 different main definitions for net zero energy. The first is the California definition, which is in all of the official California state documents. And this says that the renewable energy generated on site must be greater than or equal to the amount of electrical energy consumed on site. So this is all in mixed fuel homes that have both electrical and gas energy. And it specifies that the only energy that needs to be produced by the renewable energy sources is the electrical energy and not the gas energy. We wanted to be a little bit more ambitious with our definition. So our definition says that the renewable energy generated on site must be greater than or equal to the total energy consumed on site. So our definition includes both the electrical and gas energy. But as you'll hear later, we are big fans of fully electrifying buildings, and therefore both our definition and the California definition would become the same because there would be no gas energy use. So we can then move on to greenhouse gas. These are gases like CO2 and methane, which are known to have big impacts on global warming, and therefore the state of California is trying to reduce greenhouse gas emissions with various laws. We can then move on to mixed-use buildings or mixed-use sites. So these are buildings or sites that contain 2 or more different types of uses for their space. So these spaces can be commercial, retail, food service, residential, really anything as long as there are 2 or more different uses within one space.
So we looked at a number of case studies over the course of our research, but we decided to select the 3 that we felt were most relevant to the Village South development. But before we get into the case studies, we also wanted to highlight how we know that a building is net zero energy, since there are a lot of different types of claims that developers can make. So the first type that I wanted to highlight were those that are based on design. So that means the developer or an outside organization will do some modeling calculations for the energy consumption and generation, and then based on those calculations, they'll make sure to implement some net zero energy features in their building. But this also means that the building is designed for net zero energy in theory, but might not necessarily reach that in practice. So the first kind is LEED. As most of you know what LEED certifications are, they're quite popular for green buildings as well as for net zero energy buildings. However, they don't necessarily mean that a building is net zero energy, since they only require you to tick off a certain number of sustainability features. So I wanted to make that distinction clear. The second kind is to internally design for zero energy. So this just means that the developer, without the help of an outside organization or certification process, will do all the modeling calculations and put in all the sustainability features. And they can leave it at that, or they can move on to use the kind of performance-based criteria. So LEED does have a net zero certification. However, it just came out recently, so it's not really seen widely in use right now. And then these 3 remaining ones are ordered in terms of increasing formality. So this percentage zero energy means that the developer can measure the energy use and generation data of the building over 1 or more years, and then come out with a percentage zero energy that the net zero energy building reaches, with 100% being completely net zero energy. The second kind is from the New Buildings Institute, or NBI. And the New Buildings Institute is an outside organization that does research in energy efficient buildings, and they will go out and they will measure the data at some of these case studies and then verify whether those buildings are net zero energy or not. But again, this is not a formal type of certification like this last kind, which is from the International Living Future Institute, or ILFI. So this zero energy certification is probably the most strict type of net zero energy certification out there for buildings currently, because it has some additional requirements. For example, it requires the building to be all electric with no natural gas usage. So these are just the types of developments that we'll go over in our case studies. And we'll start out with our first case study, which is the UC Davis West Village, not to be confused with the Claremont West Village. This is in Davis, California. And we thought this was quite relevant to the Village South development, since it is mostly student housing, along with some mixed-use apartments that contain office and retail on the first floor, and then more student apartments above that. So we saw these kinds of uses in the Village South development, which is why we wanted to look at this case study. And it was built between 2011 and 2013 in 3 phases. So since it was built such a long time ago, they have some useful energy data in their reports that we can use. The types of net zero energy features that they incorporated include Energy Star high efficiency appliances, heat pump water heaters, as well as roof and wall insulation, and of course solar panels. So using those types of net zero energy features, they were able to measure internally that they were 85% net zero energy using energy use and generation data between 2012 and 2014. These were from reports that we got between 2012 and 2014. Unfortunately, we couldn't find any more recent data than that. So in these reports, they highlight some lessons learned from this data collection and from the design process. So one of the lessons learned that they highlight in these reports is that there were some modeling assumptions made that didn't allow them to completely reach net zero energy. So for example, they didn't think that students would be using so many electronic devices, such as laptops, as they do now. So that's one reason that they highlight they couldn't reach their net zero energy goal. The other really important point came up when we emailed the real estate team at the UC Davis West Village, and they actually told us that the developer at the time was not obligated to pursue net zero energy, so they were only able to implement a limited number of net zero energy features, such that the cost and the timeline of the project wasn't significantly affected. So to us, this really highlighted the importance of designing for net zero energy from the very beginning of the process, instead of just adding it as an afterthought at the end of the design process. And we see them designing from the beginning for net zero energy in the kind of expansion to the West Village that UC Davis did. And this is currently under construction. Its expected completion is in 2020, and it's just more student housing with one community center. So the important thing here is that they internally designed for net zero energy from the very beginning of the process. So that allowed them to implement some more features that they weren't able to implement in the original West Village. For example, they made sure that the West Village expansion was all electric with no natural gas usage at all, which the West Village originally did have. They also made sure to predict a net generation of energy from their solar panels so that they could account for the fact if in reality they actually had an overconsumption. So there was some leeway for that. They also additionally wanted to make sure that the development was still affordable for students, so they made sure to design such that the buildings would not exceed an individual student rent of $750 per month. And they were able to incorporate the aspect of affordability as well as net zero energy because they thought about all these things and they included all of the interested parties from the very beginning of the design process, which is also an advantage that we see in the process for our next case study, which is the Robert Redford Conservancy. So we felt that this case study was quite relevant to the Village South development since it is a historic structure and it was originally built about 100 years ago and recently retrofitted in 2017. It's also very close to us. It's on Foothill Boulevard in the Bernard Field Station. We visited it to find out more information about it, so if you haven't visited, then I highly recommend visiting there. This building has some of the strictest types of sustainability and net zero energy certifications out there. And the way that they were able to do this was, again, to be all electric. So they did actually have existing natural gas lines in the building. However, they made sure to close those off in order to make the building all electric. They also managed to incorporate a lot of low-tech net zero energy features. So you don't have to go completely high-tech with your net zero energy features. You can actually use, for example, skylights that serve a dual function for daylighting and air circulation, as well as instant flow water heaters and fans. And the good thing about the low-tech type of net zero energy features is that they are both low cost as well as high efficiency. And the other thing to note about this building is that since it's historic, they didn't want to kind of ruin the outer part of the building by putting solar panels on top of the building. So what they ended up doing was replacing most of the roofing tiles after adding insulation underneath, and then putting solar on 2 outdoor classrooms so that they could keep the historic outside of the building. So that's one option if you don't want to change at all the outside of a historic building. So with all these net zero energy features, they were able to measure net positive in their first year, and the director of the Robert Redford Conservancy really highlighted to us the importance of a collaborative process and hearing not just from the faculty and students, since this development was owned by Pitzer College, but also hearing from tribal elders as well as the residents living north of the development, and including the architects and consultants, obviously, on the entire process. And they designed for net zero energy as well as many of the interests of the community members from the very beginning again. So that to us became a really important theme as we went through the case studies. I will note, though, that this is an educational use of land, which is not entirely relevant to the Village South development. So now Ingrid will talk about a case study that has more relevant uses.
So the third case study we'll talk about is the Anna Maria Historic Green Village, which is located on Anna Maria Island in Florida, and was completed in 2011. It is particularly relevant to this, the Village South development because it has 5 buildings, 4 of which are historic 100-year-old buildings that were retrofit to net zero energy, and 1 was built later to fit the historic aesthetic. It is also a mixed-use small district. It's only around 0.6 acres, but it has both retail and food services. It was also highly successful. It earned both LEED Platinum, similar to the Redford Conservancy, and was also verified to be zero energy by the New Building Institute. So particular features, it has 400 solar panels, which generate around 120 megawatt hours per year, which exceeds its consumption of around 85 megawatt hours. So it is net positive. It has solar thermal panels for water heating. It also has a 450 feet geothermal ground source heat pump. You can see this in this diagram under development, which cools water in the summer for the air conditioning and warms water in the winter for heating, which means that the heat pump doesn't have to use as much energy because they don't have to change the temperature of the water as much. They have EPA water sense appliances that use 20% less water, such as faucets and toilets. They have soy-based insulation and spectrally selective windows, which means that they filter out the infrared spectrum of sunlight, which is where the majority of the heat is. And so it keeps the building cool while allowing for maximum natural light. Lastly, they also have energy monitoring to continually improve their energy use. So next, we'll move on to California policy trends. This is a timeline of California climate goals and achievements. So California has two main goals relating to climate change. One relates to renewable energy, and the second relates to greenhouse gas emissions. So in the early 2000s, California established a renewable portfolio standard that required electricity providers to increase their procurement of renewable energy. This helped to achieve the 2010 and 2020 goals of 20% and 33% renewable energy. Particularly in the 2020 goal was achieved 2 years early in 2018 when 34% of the energy was renewable. Looking ahead, the 2030 goal is 60% renewable energy, and in 2045, the goal is 100% carbon-free energy. For greenhouse gas emissions, in 2006, California established an economy-wide cap-and-trade program that helped to achieve the 2020 goals of 1990 levels, which was achieved 4 years early in 2016. This cap-and-trade program was extended to 2030 to help to achieve the 2030 goal of 40% below 1990 levels, and the 2050 goal is 80% below 1990 levels. So talk a bit more about how this directly relates to buildings, but we should keep in mind that California has a record of meeting and even exceeding these goals, which means that we should take it seriously and consider it as we proceed with this project. So in 2015, Governor Brown identified several key climate change pillars to achieve the 2030 greenhouse gas reduction goals. So this is a key indicator for the priorities of the California government and show that the goals I mentioned in the previous slide directly relate to buildings. So of the several pillars, 2 are particularly relevant. So 50% of the state's electricity from renewable resources by 2030. This was increased to 60% in 2018. And also double the energy efficiency savings in existing buildings and develop cleaner heating fuels by 2030. So you can see on the chart on this side that buildings account for 25% of California's greenhouse gas emissions. 10% is electricity, which is generated off-site by burning fossil fuels. And 15% is on-site emissions, which is from natural gas for things like heating and cooking. So we see that buildings are such a large source of greenhouse gas emissions that it makes sense for the California government to really focus on this as a key target area. So we're likely going to see more and more requirements regarding this in the near future. California's long-term energy efficiency strategic plan, published in 2008, is a roadmap for California to achieve maximum energy savings. So out of the 4 big and bold strategies that form the cornerstone of this strategic plan, 2 of them related to net zero energy. So the first 2, all new residential construction will be net zero energy by 2020, and all new commercial construction will be net zero energy by 2030. They also identified additional goals relating to net zero energy. So 50% of commercial buildings will be retrofit to net zero energy by 2030. Catherine will talk a little bit more about retrofitting and the cost of that, but it is worthy to note that although commercial buildings don't have to be net zero energy until 2030, retrofitting is often more expensive, and so it makes more sense to design for net zero energy from the outset. Additionally, I would like to point out that the residential construction goal is not necessarily a focus of the 2020 building codes, which Catherine will elaborate on in the next slide.
Yeah, so as Ingrid mentioned, California set the goal of having all new low-rise residential buildings be net zero energy by 2020. And just a few months ago, in 2019, they released the 2019 Building Energy Efficiency Standards, which will go into effect January 1st, 2020. And within this document, they are quoted saying that all new low-rise residential buildings shall have a photovoltaic system with an annual electrical output equal to or greater than the dwelling's annual electrical usage. So according to California's definition of being net zero energy, where the amount of renewable energy produced on site is greater than or equal to the amount of electrical energy used on site, California is following their goal of having all new low-rise residential buildings be net zero by 2020. So this document also gave us this equation to help people understand how large the required solar panel system will be. So we wanted to test out this equation, so we chose a building in the Claremont West Village, and that has 8 dwelling units, and we plugged in all of the relevant information, and we found that the required solar panel system will cover approximately 14% of the building's area and produce about 63% of the building's total yearly energy use. So it's important to note that the extra 37% is likely due to the gas energy that the building is using, but if the building were to be fully electrified, then this would be able to be 100% of the yearly energy use if we were to expand past the 14% of the roof.
So going off what Catherine just talked about electrification, we first define it. So beneficial electrification means initially installing high-efficiency all-electric appliances or replacing gas appliances with more efficient all-electric appliances. So we want to go for full electrification for 2 main reasons. Firstly, we want to achieve our definition of net zero energy that relates to total energy, not just electrical energy. And secondly, both the government and industry insiders indicate that the building codes and policy is trending towards reducing building emissions. So these are 3 quotes from the California Energy Commission, the California Solar and Storage Association, and the Passive House Network. And they all indicate that the wording of the building code suggests that the goal of the California government, it's not so much of a net zero energy goal, but rather a net zero carbon goal. So the focus is not so much of an energy use issue, but rather one of carbon emissions. They also say that the 2020 building codes and the future building codes will list more requirements regarding the heating and cooling of buildings, as well as other requirements that reduce the building emissions.
So we want to fully electrify not just new buildings, but also historic buildings in the Village South development. And that includes the Vortox building, which we thought was a particularly interesting study because we heard that it was going to be turned into a food hall, kind of inspired by Grand Central Market in LA. But the problem with food halls is that in our case studies, we hadn't actually come across a lot of case studies that incorporated food halls since traditionally they tend to use a lot of energy. So we wondered how we would go about electrifying the Vortox building if it was turned into a food hall, while people still prefer gas cooktops and aren't overly fond of electric cooktops. And this is where we came across induction cooktops. So at first we weren't really sure how this technology worked, so we'll go over it briefly in this slide. So starting from A and going through D, there's a copper coil that's under the cooktop, and that's fed with an alternating current that then generates an alternating magnetic field around the coil. So when a steel vessel is placed on top of the cooktop, there's a magnetic field generated in the pot itself, and this in turn generates an electrical field and electrical eddy currents in the material of the pot. And because of the pot's resistance, then the pot is heated, and then that heat is transferred to whatever's in the pot via conduction. So the important thing to note here is that it's just the pot that's getting hot and not the actual cooktop. So as you can see here, the part of the egg that's on the pan is getting cooked, while the part that's on the cooktop is not getting cooked at all because the cooktop doesn't really get hot. So that's one of the advantages that we came across for induction cooking. It's much safer because the cooktop itself doesn't get very hot. And then we also came across that it has more precise temperature control and is also much more efficient than traditional electric as well as gas cooktops. These are some more advantages that we found while doing our research, but we'll go over them in more detail in the following slides. And we'll also talk about cost in a bit, but one disadvantage I wanted to highlight was that you do need to use special pots, but so long as they're ferromagnetic, a lot of existing cookware nowadays is ferromagnetic, so you just need to check with like a fridge magnet and then take it to your current kitchenware, and then if that magnet sticks, then you're actually good to use it for induction. So the following little video just highlights one of the advantages of induction, and this is just pasta getting boiled in water. Yeah, so this is comparing induction and traditional electric cooktops, and we're unsure why the pasta gets really happy that it's getting boiled, but this basically just shows that induction heats up much faster than traditional electric stovetops.
So during our research, we found that many chefs had actually switched from gas to induction cooktops. So one example is Brett Thompson, who's the founder and executive chef of Pez Cantina, a coastal Mexican restaurant in Bunker Hill, LA. So here he'll talk about why he switched from gas to induction.
And that kind of leads me, I guess, to why, like, you know, electrical stuff, equipment might really work for us, because we don't want to spend the money. It's basically about 1,000 square foot space. I don't want to spend the money for a hood. I don't want to spend the money for the exhaust, all the stuff that goes into working with gas. And to be honest with you, I think, you know, I'm pretty old school in my training. I've been cooking since like 1989, and I spent, you know, a good 12 years with the Patina Group. And, you know, a couple of those years went to Europe and spent some time in France and Spain and just cooking around. And so really had that classic old school training. So for me, making the transition to like from gas to electric was sort of like just new and a change. But once I started doing it, and there's just so many benefits. You know, it's so much easier to clean these pieces of equipment. It's very easy to travel with these pieces of equipment. Just so much easier. And cleaner. And I think what Andre was saying also about recovery time, it's you know, I think as working on gas for such a long time, you know, you kind of get used to that. And I got to be honest, when we'll do catering events at people's houses and stuff who have electric stoves, you're kind of like, oh my God, all these buttons, and you're kind of confused on this. But once you get it, it's so easy. And the recovery time is fast, and it's amazing how fast these things do heat up.
So we also found lots of other restaurants who use induction. On this side are all Michelin star restaurants, and on this side are other popular restaurants, which includes Chick-fil-A, which has all electric kitchens. So you can see that there's a huge number and also a large range of different types of restaurants, and they've all switched to induction or electric cooking because they see the clear benefits of doing so.
So moving on to cost, I know cost is something that's probably in all of your minds. So we wanted to compare the cost of an induction cooktop to a gas cooktop. So we reached out to Andre Saldivar, who's the head of the Food Service Technology Center at Southern California Edison, and he provided us with this study. So this study compares a 6-burner induction stovetop to a 6-burner gas stovetop. And they assumed that both stovetops would be running for 15 hours a day, and it would cost $1 per therm of natural gas and 17 cents per kilowatt hour of electricity. And they ran both of these units for 360 days out of the year, and by the end, they found that the induction cooktop was $9 cheaper per year to run than the gas cooktop. And while $9 really is not that much money, it does go to show that electricity can be cheaper than gas, which goes against the common idea that gas is the cheapest form of energy out there. In addition to the operating cost benefits, there are other savings associated with induction cooking. So if you've ever cooked with gas, you've probably felt the amount of heat that comes off of the gas burners, the heat that will just go up and around and fill your kitchen. But since induction is just heating the pot, you won't have this heat coming off of the open flame of the gas cooktop. Therefore, you don't need to spend as much money cooling your kitchen as you would with gas. In addition, since there is less heat rising, you don't need such big ventilation hoods over your stovetop. And also, since induction is all electric, you won't need to pay to pipe gas into the building if it's a new building. So moving on to more general cost analysis, when California released its building energy efficiency standards, they were also required to do a cost analysis study to show that their new requirements wouldn't be significantly more expensive than what is currently required. So they contracted E3, which is a energy efficiency consulting company, and they put out this residential building electrification in California study. And within this study, E3 looked at HVAC, water heaters, stovetops, and clothes dryers in both single-family and multifamily residences, and they compared the gas versus electric appliances. So if we look first at the capital or cost or the initial cost, we can see that for single-family houses, the mixed fuel or the appliances that use gas cost $22,000 to install, whereas the all-electric versions only cost $13,000. This can also be seen in the multifamily houses, where the mixed fuel option costs $19,000 and the all-electric version costs $15,000. So this is just another example showing that electric energy can be less expensive than gas energy. We can additionally look at the life cycle savings. So if we look at Southern California, which is the red triangles, in the all-electric buildings for single-family and multifamily residences, we can see that there's a yearly savings of around $300 for the all-electric options, which furthers the claim that electricity can be cheaper than gas. If we compare this to the retrofit buildings, so these are retrofit single-family buildings and retrofit multifamily buildings, we see that if the building is initially designed to include gas appliances and then later on decides that they want to change that to only include electric appliances, it doesn't help you cost-wise. So in the case of the single-family houses, it's just barely less expensive to change to the electric appliances, whereas in the case of the multifamily houses, you actually end up losing money retrofitting to electricity. So this shows that if you want a building to be all electric, which we believe that it should be, you should have it be all electric from the beginning and not retrofit later.
So Rocky Mountain Institute is a nonprofit dedicated to doing research, lecturing, and publishing in the field of sustainability. And they recently published a study called the Economics of Zero Energy Homes that focused on all-electric, single-family net zero energy homes. They found that nationwide, the incremental cost is around 6.7 to 8.1%. Note that California has higher energy efficiency standards, and as Catherine talked about, the building codes say that certain residential buildings have to have solar panels, which means that the incremental cost will be much lower. There is some additional upfront costs, but there's also significant returns. So a commonly used measure is payback period, which measures the amount of time the initial investment will be paid back. In California, the payback is around 12 years, and in LA is around 11 years. However, this does not give the full picture because it gives you the impression that the homeowners don't benefit until after 11 years or 12 years. But in fact, they get cash returns every month because of energy savings. Annualized return on investment, ROI, and internal rate of return are both very commonly used measures to measure the profitability of an investment. So California average is around 3.4% ROI and 6.8% IRR. Los Angeles has an average of around 4.2% ROI and 8.5% IRR. If the incremental cost is added to the mortgage, then the added cost per month is actually less than the energy savings. So the first month net savings is around $62 in California and $80 in LA. And this shows that zero energy homes can actually be cheaper to own from the very first month. So although there is some added upfront costs, the significant returns means that zero energy homes are actually a lot more affordable than many people think.
So moving on to the modeling, we had done all this research and found it might be cheaper to electrify and it might be better, but we wanted to know if it was possible to do it in the Village South. So we split the land into 6 different regions that were roughly based on the presentation on April 29th, and that presentation gave us some assumptions of what each of these spaces would be used for. We then made some additional assumptions of how much of the land the buildings would cover and how much of the building's rooftops we could cover in solar panels. Additionally, we assumed that the entire space would be fully electric. And after playing around with the numbers, changing the area and changing the energy consumption numbers, we found that in the majority of our scenarios, we were able to reach net zero energy in this Village South development. So moving on to some cost analysis of our modeling, we also wanted to know what the payback period would be for the additional solar panels that were required to make the entire Village South development be net zero. So by assuming that it would cost $3 per installed watt of solar panels and that the utility rate was 16 cents per kilowatt hour, we found that the payback period for the additional solar panels that would be required to make the whole area net zero energy, so not including the required residential solar panels, that the payback period would be just over 9 years. And as Ingrid mentioned previously, if you include the initial cost of the solar panels into the monthly mortgage, you see payback almost immediately because you're saving money on your energy bill since you won't have one if you're net zero.
So apart from the energy savings and cost savings that we highlighted earlier, as well as the benefits that come along with induction cooking, we also found even more benefits of net zero energy buildings throughout our research. So these are some features of net zero energy buildings that you'll commonly find, and then their associated benefits, some of which relate to those requirements of sustainable communities that we talked about at the very beginning of our presentation. So for example, if you have solar panels on your building, then that's good for affordable housing since it means savings for low-income residents on their monthly electricity bill, as well as residents tend to be protected more from energy price fluctuations. Then for efficient appliances, the good thing about Energy Star appliances is they're often water saving in addition to being energy efficient. And then we talked already about the lower amount of pollutants that come from cooking with electric appliances. So for air circulation, you have better indoor air quality and less mold and dust, which means that your building is easier to clean. And also you have fewer health risks. And finally, for insulation, we wanted to highlight that good insulation also means you get noise reduction inside your building, which we felt was important to highlight since the Village South development will be placed near the railway tracks. So in summary, at the very beginning of our research, we were all quite interested in sustainability, but we felt that net zero energy buildings might not be that feasible. It was quite ambitious. And we also thought that the only incentive really was if the developer or the architects were also interested in sustainability like we were. But over the course of our research, we found that there are actually many examples of net zero energy buildings. There are actually over 20 buildings that are either verified by the New Buildings Institute or certified by the International Living Future Institute. So we had to be actually quite selective with our case studies. We also found through our case studies that a collaborative process is really important if you want your building to be net zero energy, since you can incorporate a lot of additional benefits that aren't related to the environment as well as net zero energy if you plan everything from the beginning and make sure all the interested parties are participating in the design process. The other thing we found is that from the California policy trends, it's clear that the incentive isn't just to design for sustainability, but it's actually going to be required in policy later. And we also found that a lot of the incentives from doing net zero energy buildings will not be available really if you retrofit for net zero energy, as opposed to if you design your building for net zero energy, design your new building to fit net zero energy. We also found that there were a lot of benefits in terms of cost of electrical appliances as well as the cost of net zero energy homes, and that means that net zero energy buildings are becoming more and more cost effective, which is great. And we also found a lot of additional benefits in terms of sustainable communities, health, and wellness. So from our modeling, we found that net zero energy is possible at the Village South development for a number of our scenarios, and we also found from our research that there are so many additional benefits that come along with it. So thank you for listening to our presentation. We know that was a lot of information, so we'll now take any questions you have about our research.
So I have a mic here, and in order to record this and have your questions recorded as well, please, I'll just pass this around to whoever has a question. Bob.
One of your slides mentioned low-rise residential. Could you go back to that slide and could tell us, and also tell us how many floors low-rise is?
Yeah. This one. Yeah. So low-rise residential building is defined as a building that has 3 stories or fewer. Yeah, I think that answered the question.
This is a very interesting and thorough analysis. And it seems to me that what you've done with this project could be used anywhere for redevelopments or construction in Claremont. So would you think that because of your analysis, it might be possible to have net zero energy in most any development?
Yeah, I mean, all of the numbers that we used for our modeling were based on just generic California. So I would say that it is possible at least anywhere in California, but I mean, you need to try hard and really like focus on being net zero from the beginning of the design process.
Thank you. Excellent presentation. One of the things that I noted in your presentation of the cost-benefit analysis, which often does not get well communicated, is that you have savings from the first month. It may take 9.06 years to get all of your investment back, but it's not like you have to wait 9 years to get anything back. You do get something back every month, and that's particularly important, I think, for low-income housing, that they see some benefits right away, because in 9 years they will probably have moved. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to commend your efforts. You are the generation that will live with the decisions that we make today, and will live in the buildings that you hope to have us or promote us to build. The question I think for all of us, that the opportunity in Claremont, this is perhaps the biggest and maybe last major kind of infill project that will go on in Claremont. That it does set the example for future infill of a smaller kind, the residential kind of projects. And so I think that emphasizing the kinds of things that you have brought out in the study, the fact that savings occur almost immediately, that retrofitting with gas is not the approach to take. All of those, I think, in any kind of activity that the city kind of considers in the future, including accessory dwelling units, building them to the standard that you're proposing is a good idea. And lastly, has anybody done a study to determine what although you've demonstrated that it's cost effective out the get-go, that in some places it may not be, depending upon the kind of weather circumstances. Is there any study that's been done to determine the appetite of people to do what is right, absent the kind of return on investment, which again is always it's a market-driven, and we seem to focus on it as the sole benefit. That's just the social benefit, the terms for improving our environment that would come with this. Are you aware of any studies that have done that?
So that's not in the presentation, but I did come across a study at one point that I forget which state they did it in, but it was a questionnaire where they were asking people if they would pay like 4% cost premium for net zero energy buildings. And I think the majority response there, it was like greater than 50% said yes, if that's a good indication. I don't remember where it was from, but I'll try to find it. And if, yeah, we're probably going to, sorry? Oh, yeah. So it was from the same institute that Ingrid's slide on the cost benefits was from. Yeah, so we can include that in an email out to all of you later. Yeah.
Do
do you know how sensitive your analysis is for taller buildings? Because I have the impression that there's a lot of desire for 4-story buildings by the developers, and even 5-story. That's quite contentious in the Village South. So what happens to your analysis in greater than 3-story buildings?
So once you get above 3 stories, it does get much more challenging. I'd say 3 stories is probably the maximum where you could comfortably say that you could reach net zero energy. But if you really work on the other sustainable aspects, like working on insulation and like double paned windows and just the various other aspects other than just slapping some solar panels on the roof and calling it a day, it is potentially possible for 4-story buildings to be net zero. I'm not sure about 5 stories. I think that'd be really pushing it, but even if you're not completely net zero, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't try to be as energy efficient as possible.
I think you guys did a really great job on this. I work for National Community Renaissance. We're a developer of affordable housing throughout Southern California. We're actually building zero net energy affordable housing projects today in advance of the code because the economics work. So the stuff that you guys covered is sensational. Just keep using this. And I do have 2 questions for you guys, if you could handle 2. The first one is the information is terrific. The visuals are great, but you left me hanging. The cliffhanger is the village doesn't get there for Z&E. So what's the gap? How much did you run out of roof space? Is it height of buildings? What kept you from believing that the village can't get to Z&E? And then the second question I have for you, if you guys could sequence this is a great appendix document for anybody. The research, the analytics are there. The critical thing for any community who's interested in this stuff now is to take this and now make recommendations to the actual developers who will be doubtful and skeptical and cynical in some regard. What do you do with this information? Like, what kind of recommendations, and how do you control both development and design?
So as for your first question, I think you may have misinterpreted, because in most of our modeling scenarios, we did find that it could be net zero. So there aren't any.
So you did get there?
Yeah, we got there most of the time. There were 1 or 2 cases when we started pushing the building heights that it was a little iffy. Do you want to answer the second?
Sorry, just to clarify on your second question, do you mean like what will we do with this like information immediately after this presentation? Or?
Such rich material, you guys. What can you do with this to put this into the hands of people who will actually be forced to deal with this? It's like, for me, it's a great appendix document, but now hit them over the head. Make the recommendations. Tell them it needs to be carbon neutral. Tell them it needs to be zero net energy. Tell them that they have to define the roof space so you can get the renewable energy. I would love, like, you guys need another semester to kind of now turn the screws and turn this into the implementation document.
Sure. Well, in terms of what's happening to this presentation, we're probably going to send an email to everyone who is here, as well as people on the emailing list for net zero energy in the Village South development. Yeah, sustainable Claremont. Yeah, so that this kind of information will be available to everyone who's on that emailing list, I guess, if that's a start.
Let me just jump in. I think you're Tim. I can recognize you from your question. All the people that we want to influence and persuade are in this room. So we're taking a very civil discourse, collaborative approach to this whole thing, keeping an open mind that maybe we won't be able to reach net zero energy, but we can really try hard, and we think we can. So we're just going to keep interacting with people, and you know, we really are basically not professionals. We don't have 30 years in the industry. So we have to keep an open mind and just feel our way into this.
You're on the right track. That's all I'm going to say.
Did you assume that the solar panels would be flat, or they would be slanted toward the sun? Would they be slanted directly toward the south or a little more toward the afternoon sun? What were your assumptions about that? And secondly, did you give any consideration to the kinds of shades or awnings that might be over windows that would cause them to allow sun to come in when the sun is low in the winter, but keep sun out when the sun is high in the summer?
So as for these solar panels, we didn't focus on orientation. We just took the solar irradiance of Claremont and said, like, how much sun can the solar panels get if it's like the optimal scenario. And for that, I think they were assumed to be flat. They didn't track the sun, I know that much. It was like horizontal irradiance. So we weren't tracking anything. And as for the awnings over the windows, we looked into a lot of the like energy efficiency measures of putting awnings over windows and how that helps keep the heat out in the summer and keeps the heat in the winter, but we didn't factor that into the modeling.
Two questions. One is, you referred to the double pane windows that have a special treatment for keeping out infrared. What's the price differential on those windows versus the conventional, quote unquote, conventional double pane windows? And how flexible is your model? I believe the current residential coverage for houses is somewhere around 30% of the land, not 40%. If we have the smaller coverage, can we still hit net zero?
So regarding your question on windows, we didn't really do a lot of cost analysis in that aspect. We mainly looked at solar panels, but we can definitely look into that and other measures at the cost difference.
As for your second question, currently the model has the space being 35% residential and 65% commercial. And we did play around with that ratio a little bit. And we were able to still reach net zero. I think it was a little, I'm not sure, but we messed with the numbers a bunch and figured out when it could be net zero and when it couldn't, and I can rerun those simulations. And
two questions having to do with the storage of energy. One of the major issues often raised with using solar energy as the main source is if you need to store it, and you didn't talk about nighttime, daytime kinds of issues, but also the passive solar isn't just a matter of keeping sunlight out in the summer and allowing it in the winter. There's also ways to store energy, solar energy, passively in buildings with thermal mass, and I wondered if you considered the storage issue, and secondly, did you consider passive solar as one possibility for the storage of energy?
So in terms of energy storage, like in batteries, then there's oftentimes, like in our case studies, we didn't see energy storage a lot. And the reason for that is because you might run into a problem with the utilities not wanting you to do that for several reasons. There are a couple of residential net zero energy communities in Arizona that are trying to do energy storage, but that's really some of the only case studies we've seen that do energy storage because of that conflict with the utilities. In terms of your second point about passive solar storage, we haven't really looked into that, but it's something that we could do in the future. Thank you.
I think this may be related, but as far as I understand, for over 30 years, if you're building residential units in Israel, they have to have solar water heating. So passive solar. As far as I'm aware, it's very similar photons that hit in Southern California, and I would expect that they would be able to do that. Do you know why California hasn't looked into a similar mandate?
So The California Energy Commission has talked about what their future policy trends are, and one of the things that they are planning to have requirements for is heating and cooling in the 2020 building codes. But currently, they have included a set of requirements with regards to solar panels, and I think that's like sort of a step-by-step process, because you don't want to have to like bombard the developers with all these requirements. So that's probably a next step type of thing.
You guys don't have to be expert today. Just sometime in the next 5 or 10 years, you will be expert. Solar thermal is a requirement in the California Energy Code. So for residential, when you're designing a building, they give you a prescriptive list of things that you should be doing, and it's based on certain assumptions. And if you're doing what you guys are doing, which is modeling around some of these assumptions and sometimes trading things off, you can get away from certain things. But the requirement for hot water heating for residential is an 84% efficient hot water heater or boiler and 20% solar thermal. So it's a requirement. So if you don't do it, then you pay a penalty and you have to do something else to make up for your sins and transgressions. That's kind of how the energy code works for both single family and multifamily and commercial.
Can I ask you, Tim, actually, I think what the team has been finding is that heat pump hot water heaters are being featured now in the building code. So that may be one option.
Yeah, so the state's goals, as you guys really nicely laid out, the regulatory framework for how all this started, especially starting in 2007 with AB 32, lays the pathway for how we're going to get to, carbon neutral energy grid. And the state now realizes that it doesn't include natural gas, that there is already discussion about the next code cycle moving towards carbon neutrality. The hardest thing to do from an energy standpoint in a residential building is, and especially multifamily, is heat hot water. It's about 30% of the energy that we use in our homes is used to heat hot water. And natural gas is so much cheaper than electricity that it made a whole lot of sense to encourage people to use natural gas until the heat pump water heater came into being. A heat pump water heater is just like a air conditioner. It uses the refrigerant cycle to actually extract cool energy out of hot water, and in its place it leaves a lot of heat. And so it's just using a compressor just like your split air conditioner in most of your homes. And the heat pump water heaters today take 1 unit of energy in electricity and produce 3.5 units of energy out. It's an energy factor. And an electric resistance hot water heater is slightly less than 1 to 1. A gas furnace is going to be, in the best cases, is 94% efficient. Most of our hot water heaters today are probably 84%. So we're losing 16% of the energy in heating, storing, or it's going up the flue or something like that. So the heat pump water heaters are a huge promise for all of us. The challenge is, how do you do multifamily housing? We love doing boilers because in affordable housing, multifamily, because you could just have one source for heating hot water in one place and throw all your energy there and put a nice solar thermal system on it. But then you're using natural gas. They don't make the heat pump water heaters in huge scale yet that are boiler sized. And that's what we're kind of waiting for in my company. We want carbon neutrality. It kills me when I walk around and say I'm doing zero net energy buildings, and then I tabulate how much CO2 is going to the air because we're using natural gas supplemented by solar thermal. We're still not there. So I want that heat pump boiler.
Well, you have the microphone. Can you repeat the name of your company?
Yeah, National Community Renaissance. We're out of Rancho Cucamonga, but we build affordable housing throughout most of Southern California, inland. And what I do is, I'm an architect, but I've been sucked slowly into the world of sustainability, is we build affordable housing and we do it zero net energy because we prove to people that we don't have big budgets. We're not building with tons of money. We have the thinnest budgets, and if we can build affordable housing that's zero net energy, then everybody can. So the case that I would make to the village is when you speak to the developers, is there anybody who's from a developer here? Excellent, great. When you talk to them, encourage the development team to explore these options with the design teams and write it into the design criteria. You want a zero net energy, carbon neutral building. Just throw 3 paragraphs on the front of this, call it the introduction recommendations for the design guidelines or the basis of design, and that's what you throw out to people, and then take everything you guys have accumulated and put it in as the appendix. That did more than answer your question, I think, I hope. Sorry.
In my experience, when you're after a major goal, you can say, well, all these things help, and then they have a variety of payback times, and it averages 9 years, let's say. But there are really some obvious things, like I was really impressed with the induction heating, you know, restaurants, et cetera. It seems like there's some things in there where you've got low equipment cost and you've got low operating, so the payback's going to be terrific. So it seems that if you would be breaking out these different methods of reducing energy use, some would be adopted by everyone as soon as they understood what it was, because it's a win from the beginning. Others are going to be a real stretch. It's going to get less and less payback per dollar, let's say, as you get to the 4th story on a building or whatever it is. So I'm wondering, is anybody doing that, breaking down all the different approaches that you've covered here as to the payback of those individual approaches? Because there should be a lot of voluntary compliance, you would think.
So I'd say the closest information we have right now is the E3 residential building electrification report. So in addition to the figures that I put up here, they also went through with each of the individual appliances that they looked at and compared one-to-one the electric versus gas options. But other than that, I'm not sure that I'm aware of any studies that are specifically making that comparison. But they're probably out there. There's a plethora of information.
I missed part of your talk. I missed all of your talk, but I'm wondering if in any of your case studies, if you came across, especially in these kind of mixed-use districts, the use of parking structures for solar.
Yeah, so in the very first case study we talked about, it was the UC Davis West Village. They had solar on their parking structures. Thank you. Yeah.
Also on the Anna Maria Island, they have 2 carports, and they also have, those 2 carports you can see on the diagram. They also have solar on top.
Hi, I had a quick question with your case studies. So I'm a Cal Poly Pomona student. Did you use any data from the Lyle Center? I know that they've been using a lot over the past 20, 30 years of just net zero energy. And so I was just curious if you had into that. And then there's a 2-part. The second question is, you said that it would be more expensive to go retrofitting, you know, if a building was established, than to start from the beginning. But did you have any data reflecting further down the road if they recovered those costs for the retrofitting?
Sure. So could you just say the full name of the Lyle Center?
The Lyle Center?
Yeah.
The John Lyle Center in Cal Poly Pomona?
Okay. I don't think I came across it when I was looking at case studies, but...
Okay. Well, then I'm just dropping in your ear now then.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you.
As for the retrofits, I don't think the study looked at how the costs might be down the road. I think that's just retrofits for like right now. But yeah.
Anything else? Okay. Let's call it a night and thank the team once again.